There's Elon the individual, which I would never want to underestimate, but there's also Elon the collective, which is really like 20 people or so that have been working with him for a very long time. They've built unbelievable amounts of trust. They
execute his will autonomously.
And just with like force and scale and precision. Basically all the other entrepreneurs I know in Silicon Valley, this is not how they operate.
Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Shaun Maguire. He is a partner here at Sequoia. I would like to start off with, you've had the opportunity to kind of be close to Elon and see how he operates. And I think a lot of people think to themselves, like, how does Elon do it? So how does he do it?
I mean, look, there's people that are a lot closer to him than me. But I've been lucky I'm close to a lot of people that are second degree. And there's a lot of things I'd say. So one, at Sequoia, when we were doing one of our big investments, I think this was a big SpaceX investment. One of my partners was like, how can he possibly do multiple companies? And I ended up writing this kind of internal letter where I drew an analogy to this kind of weird math collective called Bourbaki. I'm guessing, have you ever heard of Nicholas Bourbaki?
I've not.
So I may have some of the details a little off, but Bourbaki was a French math collective. So what happened is sometime, I think it was like the 40s, 50s, something like that. I can't remember exactly, maybe even the 30s. I can't remember, of the 1900s. This new mathematician burst onto the scenes and started solving a bunch of unsolved, problems in mathematics. And the math community was like, who is Bourbaki? Who is this person? And it turns out Bourbaki wasn't one person. Bourbaki was a collection of a bunch of like very, very talented young French mathematicians. And first of all, people don't quite understand that France has one of the best math communities in the world, like huge number of Fields medalists. I think something like 25% of the Fields medalists in the last 25 years were trained in France. So that's an insane stat, and I think would surprise a lot of people. And so anyways, they have this really incredible math education, and their mathematicians have a little more flair, a little more pizzazz than what we think of as, mathematicians here. And they did this just kind of to mess with everyone and to have fun.
Mathematicians with Riz.
Yeah, quite literally mathematicians with Riz. And if you want, like, go look there's a mathematician named Cedric Villani. He won the Fields Medal in like 2012, something like that. He always wears tuxedos with these like crazy bedazzled spiders on them and these crazy bow ties. And like the French mathematicians have a lot of Riz, which is not what you'd expect. And so anyways, there's this French math collective that just kept solving these unsolved problems. And I'm like, who is Bourbaki? And for me, and then it came out later that it was like 10 or 20 mathematicians that were all doing work together and putting only one name on the work. And the way I think about like Elon is obviously an individual and like one of the most talented humans of all time, and a visionary who works harder than I can even imagine, works 16-hour days, 7 days a week.
He just
regularly.
Works when he's awake.
I mean, and I think maybe even sometimes when he's sleeping or he doesn't sleep much, but I've tried to keep up with him a couple days, and like, I'm a pretty fit guy. I literally can't keep up with him physically. And so anyways, Elon as an individual is one of the most talented people in the world, but I view Elon as almost like there's a second thing. There's Elon the collective, which is probably about 20 people. I'm not going to name any of them. And there's, roughly 20 people that, have been working with him for a very long time. They've built unbelievable amounts of trust. They know they can almost read his mind, and they know what he would want to have done in some situation. And then they also know when they need to escalate a question to him. And this, like, you can't build this quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of takes like a decade to really trust someone and to test the limits of what they can do, and test that they can do things at the highest possible level and almost like be a proxy for you. And I've actually never seen another entrepreneur that has done this the way that Elon has.
I'm kind of thinking of Mr. Beast is the only person that I've ever heard of. He basically tried to clone himself,
Yeah.
and then he tried to have his like top lieutenants also clone themselves,
I
but
love
with
that.
3 or 4 people each.
I know a little. I live in LA, so I know a little bit about Mr. Beast, the way he operates. I think
Mhm.
that's a good analogy. Um, but for basically all the other entrepreneurs I know in Silicon Valley, this is not how they operate, and it's really a superpower for Elon. And it's not easy to replicate. And I'd say there's a lot of things that go into it. Like one, first of all, Elon is just one of the best judges of talent on the planet. And like, I'm not going to name the person, but there's a very senior person that works for him who studied economics in college, and they went in for like a final interview with Elon, and he said, "You're not going to do biz dev. You're going to do mechanical engineering," because the person was he could just tell they're a very good engineer, and they literally studied economics. And the person rose up to be a very senior engineer. And this is the type of thing that it's like, you can't fake that. That is such a superpower to be able to meet some young kid straight out of college, study economics, and be like, actually, you have an engineering mind. You're not doing biz dev. You're going to be a mechie. And so anyways, like, he's an incredible read of talent, and he gives people the rope to hang themselves. And what this means is that if you actually perform, you will rise up really, really quickly. But if you screw up once, like,
You're out.
you're out. And, when you do this over, 10 years, and you just keep letting people rise up way more quickly than they could in almost any other organization, you build incredible loyalty with the most capable, competent people, because you basically give them more than they could get anywhere. And especially if you compensate them generously for that. And then you also turn out a lot of people, because it turns out most people are not very competent. Most people are not very loyal. And, it's, you kind of, but I'm a believer that it's like it's the top 1% in the organization that are the most important,
Mhm.
and are the ones that really, really drive things. And those are the people that you want to stick around for a long time and really learn like where all the knobs and levers are in an organization. And so anyways, this is how I would try to explain, like, there's Elon, the individual, which I would never want to underestimate or be, enemy with, because he's a very competent enemy. But there's also Elon, the collective, which is really like 20 people or so that, like, you can just like
Execute his will autonomously.
well said. And so execute his will autonomously, and just with like force and scale and precision. And it's something that people don't have intuition for what 20 people that are aligned can do.
I imagine that like execution ability and speed is like
Mhm.
critically important. And I also think your bar has probably shifted over the past like 15 years for what great looks like there. How has that been?
So it's a really good question. Yes, my bar has shifted a lot. I would say the one thing that my bar hasn't shifted on, I think one of my superpowers is I've been just some partially comes from luck. I've been lucky in my life because I have spent time in a lot of communities. I have seen like truly the best people in the world in many different fields. And I'll give you examples. Like in 2010, so I spent time doing a math PhD. I ended up finishing my PhD in physics, but for a while I was doing math. And I had a PhD advisor for a while who was incredibly talented mathematician named Nikolai Makarov. And one of his students had won a Fields Medal, actually won the Fields Medal that summer, 2010. This is Stanislav Smirnov. And so basically, I had a PhD advisor at the time, and I ended up doing this really advanced math summer program called the Clay Math Institute Summer School, which that summer it was in probability and statistical physics in 2 dimensions. And the summer school was in Brazil. It was in Buzios, Brazil, which is a beautiful part of Brazil. So we went for a month, and it was I can't remember exactly how many, but about 100 people. It was probably 30 professors, 30 postdocs, 30 grad students, something like that. And it was unbelievably high level. And so out of the 100 people there were a couple Fields medalists like Gwendolyn Warner. And then there was, one person who got a Fields medal that summer, Stanislav Smirnov. And there was one PhD student who was a PhD student in France. His name is Hugo Duminil-Chopin. And so he ended up getting the Fields medal like 8 years later. And so I spent a month, we were all like living in one hotel and we were together all day, every day. And the grad students would spend, so it was about 30 grad students, something like that's my memory. We would spend a lot of time together and we we're all competing. Like the American kids were competing against the French kids. The French, it's really hard to explain how tight knit their math community is because they pretty much all go to 2 universities like ENS and Polytechnique for their undergrad equivalent.
Is it like a competitive dynamic between those 2 different universities, or is it kind of like a shared?
They have a competitive dynamic, but then when there was all the and there were probably 8 to 10 of the grad students, and then there's probably like 6 or 7 from America and a few like from Oxford and Cambridge and a few from other places, a couple from Israel. The French were very competitive, and we would play sports, play volleyball a lot of times. And like the French kids it's just not what Americans would think of as math people. They were like psychotically competitive. And they would always want to play against, everyone else.
Would it be a more like the Greeks where you were both fit and also highly intellectual?
They were fit and highly intellectual. I would also say the Russian, mathematicians were fit and intellectual. The American ones were not as
just
fit.
Just the intellectual.
But so like I was in this program and I mean, I got to interact pretty closely with 2 people that went on to win Fields medals, one that summer. And we all knew like it was basically everyone there assumed that Stanislav Smirnov was going to get the Fields medal that summer. And for Hugo, kind of the broad consensus was that he was the best of the PhD students at the time. And so for me to get to like see this level of mathematician where you actually get to see the true tail outliers and you kind of even get to anticipate ahead of time, like who's going to win the Fields medal, all of this, like it gave me this grounding, and I'm going to bring this all together in a second, but it gave me this grounding in like, what is just true tail outlier mathematician ability. I also, like in the summer before that, I worked in an algorithmic trading group at DRW, and like DRW was probably the top algo group at the time, definitely a top 3 or 4. And the intern class in the algo group, there were 5 of us, and all 5 were like, people were really smart. So one of the 5 was this guy, Yufei Zhao. Yufei he was a legend at MIT. He was a 3-time Putnam Fellow, I believe, and I believe a 3-time IMO gold medalist. And then he became a tenured math professor at MIT doing combinatorics. But he kind of so this is college math competition called the Putnam. Yufei kind of broke the Putnam because he's such a good teacher and he knows competition so well that before Yufei, whoever won the Putnam any year would be kind of equally likely to be Harvard or MIT or then a little bit less likely, but sometimes Princeton, sometimes Stanford, a couple times like in the 20 years prior, Caltech. And Yufei just broke it. MIT just won every single time after Yufei. And so I did this internship with Yufei, and there were 5 interns. And so I was with Yufei all day, every day. And we would all do brain teasers with each other. Like we'd probably write code for 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day. And the rest, we would just do brain teasers with each other. And this, for me, having this calibration where I've gotten to spend like meaningful intellectual time with the absolute tail outlier people, it's given me this calibration on true tail outliers. I'm going to give you, I've come up with a framework and I'll mention in a second. But I actually started my PhD in AI in the stats department at Stanford. But this is before deep learning. This is when it was statistical learning. And so I got to see a lot of the early, like really good AI people. I then did it in physics, and I knew a couple Nobel Prize winners before they become Nobel Prize winners in physics, like Kip Thorne. And so I've been able to be exposed to the absolute most extreme tail people in a bunch of different fields. And as an investor, this is incredibly powerful because it's the real outlier people that drive, like,
It's the 0.00001% sort of
yes.
situation. I also know that when you meet one of those people, it just smacks you over the head, like how good they are. And then your bar for quality just drastically shifts.
Yeah. So I'm gonna build on that. I would say I've learned a lot of things. One, I now think of people in intellectual fields. Um, I'll make a few comments. One, in mathematics, I think that there's something like 15 distinct levels beyond just being incredibly good at mathematics. I'll walk you through a bunch of these. And I think these levels are distinct. And there's this one way feature where people can look down, like they can look to the,
It's a very clear, like every different tier is obvious from above, but it's not exactly obvious.
It's not obvious
below.
at all from below. Yeah. And like once someone is 3 tiers better than you can basically just tell that they're better than you. But if placing someone 3 tiers for 6 tiers is very hard for someone, let alone telling the distinction between like 6 tiers and 9 tiers, it's just incredibly hard for people. I'll give you an example on the math side, and then I'll make an analogy to the chess rating scale. So in mathematics, like you have basically the once in a century mathematician. This is someone that is better at math in basically every subfield than everyone else. And, even for fields metal level people, they can kind of go see someone else's research problem, and within a few weeks, like they're ahead of them in the area. And, this only happens about once a century. Then you have the like once a decade person, and a once a decade person it's like guaranteed they win a Fields Medal, because over the course of their life, they'll probably do like 5 to 10 things that are worthy of a Fields Medal rather than just one or two. And someone like this, I mean, like maybe it's someone like Terry Tao, and it's hard to say exactly, but these are the types of names you'd have.
Is this something where you can only kind of figure it out looking backwards on whether or not they
No,
were
I
that
think
good,
you can.
or...
I think you can oftentimes, like, if you are on a very high level, you can actually tell looking forwards. But anyways, you have like the once in a decade mathematician. Then you have like the typical Fields medalist who's incredibly good and does call it 2 or 3 things in their life that might be worthy of it because there's some luck and there's a bunch of people, not a bunch, but there's some luck at that level. And then you have the person that like just gets tenure at a top 5 math research university at a very young, like at a young age. So someone that gets tenure at MIT or Harvard without getting a Fields medal. And so maybe someone like Yufei Zhao, who I mentioned before, is like on that level. So it's like they very easily get tenure at a top university at a young age. And then you have someone that like easily gets tenure at a young age at a top 20 university. And then you have someone that like just gets tenure at a top 5 university in mathematics. And then you have someone that like just gets tenure at a top 20 university in mathematics. And then you have someone that like, from here, there's a little bit of a branching. Like maybe someone decides to like be a math professor at a top 50 university, or maybe they decide to join a hedge fund. And when I say join a hedge fund, it's like they still got a math PhD at a very, like at a young age from a top 5 university. So it's like the median Harvard or MIT or Princeton math PhD. And then you have someone that like easily gets a math PhD from a top 20 university. Then you have someone that like easily gets a PhD from a top in math from top 50 university. And then, and just bear with me.
Keeps on going.
Then you have someone that's like trivially gets a math major in, pure math from a top 5 undergrad. Then like trivially gets a math major from a top 20 undergrad. Every one of these is a distinct level. And looking down, like it's pretty easy to place, like almost exactly where someone is within 1 or 2 tiers within 30 minutes of talking to another mathematician. And then you have, all the way down to like for every one of these people, they get an 800 on the math SAT without even trying. Like that's like, you don't even, these people are just born 800 math SAT is a joke. And when you take with all these levels, and I could go through 15 levels or so, when you're in high school, to like the typical high school teacher that teaches math, they can't tell the difference between any of these levels. And so just like anyone that gets an 800 on the math SAT, like they're all lumped into the same category. You lose all the texture and gradation, but having the ability to tease out with like pretty high fidelity, like ahead of time before the accolades have caught up. So to be able to predict where people are going to go in the spectrum, like that is an absolute superpower. And you only develop it by being around, by seeing the absolute most extreme tails and having some talent yourself. Like I think you can only look a few levels ahead of yourself with precision. So kind of the way I think about this in terms of the chess rating scale. So like in the FIDA chess rating scale, it's something like the best players in the world are around 2850, 2870, something like that. Magnus Carlsen and these guys. 2500 is where you can start to be a grandmaster. If you have a 2850 rated player, play a 2700 rated player, they're going to absolutely crush them 99% of the time or more.
This is where you get the video of Magnus Carlsen drunk beating someone else at 2500, 2600.
He can play like 10 of them, simultaneously with the blindfold while drunk. If you take a 2700 rated player and you have them play a 2500 rated player, like they'll absolutely dominate them. The lower you go, the more variance you get. So like 2500 rated against 2300, it's probably not 99%. It's, 90%, 85%. And I don't play chess.
It's fuzzier and fuzzier.
It gets fuzzier and fuzzier. Mm-hmm. For what it's worth, I don't play chess, but I'm very proud of this. I have a great grandfather that beat Alex Alakine, who was the world champion when my great grandfather beat him. The game is on chessgame.com or whatever, chessgames.com. He also beat the US champion. I was forbidden from playing chess as a kid because my grandfather felt like he lost his father to chess. So I don't play chess. I don't know. I'm just using this because I think it's universal language, but I'm not an expert in chess. But anyways, if you do the thought experiment of if you have 1,000 rated player, randomly see like the games of say 1,400 rated players, 1,800 rated players, 2,200 rated players, 2,600 rated players, and they have to place, which game is which. It's random. Like they have basically no ability to know which game is which. If you do it the other way, if you have a 2,800 rated player, see, these games, they can tell you in 10 moves or whatever, or
with like great accuracy,
with unbelievable accuracy. And so this for me is as an investor, where my core job is assessing people and talent, and especially at the earliest stages, and understanding like the level of talent. This is a mental model I developed that my first question when I meet a founder is to try to understand what skills matter for this company. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of companies where intelligence don't matter at all. If you're, if it's like a simple product to build and
trash collecting company.
I mean, if it's trash robots, then it matters. If it's a mafia driven, like mafia mandated trash company, then no, intelligence doesn't matter. So its first question is figure out what properties actually matter. And then from there, try to figure out like, where is this person on the scale for the most important traits, whether it's sales ability, whether it's like their raw mathematics ability for AI research companies, whether it's their, you just have to figure out, and I could go through a lot of examples of companies, whether it's like their pure pain tolerance, which is the case for some companies. But anyways, I'm sorry for the very, very long monologue, but I think this is underappreciated in the world, especially in the tech community, just like how distinct these levels are in the tail
My little brother is like a top 1 or 2 in multiple StarCraft 2-esque games in the
Legend.
world. And
Legend.
he's it's funny to watch him analyze other people because he
Yeah.
can pin like someone within a 30 points or 50 points on a 3,000
sure.
rating scale
Yeah.
every single game that he sees
Yeah.
without looking, which is
100%.
kind of fun.
And looking quickly,
Yeah,
he can probably
within like
tell
a
in the
few
first few minutes. Yeah.
some it might be even like the first minute and a half.
Yeah. He can probably tell within like 100 or 200 within the first 30 seconds, and then give him 5 minutes and he'll have it down to within like 30.
But there's
SR
there's
points.
also something where like if you just see a position on a board, like a god view of a position, he could probably pinpoint
100%.
relative
100%.
performance.
Even just a static
skill.
snapshot,
Yeah.
like he
It's like
can
no this guy, high rated player would put them
and
in.
knowing how long into the game for StarCraft, because you need to know what they've developed within 1 minute, 2 minutes or whatever.
When you're trying to use that sort of mental model on a business where you aren't, let's say, a 2800 or 2850 on all these different industries, how do you kind of gauge that with a founder?
Yeah, look, it's there's a lot of industries where it doesn't matter, but even just for assessing, say, the quality of engineering teams, it's in almost every tech company, the quality of engineering team matters. And so like a big part of why Google was so successful is just purely that the founders were geniuses and their engineering team was one of the best of all time early on. And, and the same is true for Facebook, and the same is true for like Stripe in the early days, and like a lot of companies. And this is something where it's just, I think it's a critical input to a lot of companies. So even if it's not necessary for the founders, like the raw technical ability will come up more often than you would think.
So you basically use like the engineering team as a proxy to gauge whether or not the founder is good.
It depends. Like it depends. That is. So I'll give you, like, this isn't the only thing, but so I was the first investor in a company called Factory. It's an AI cogen company. It's still a very early stage company. It's starting to do really well now though. The founder and I got really good terms in the first investment, $1 million for 20%. Because the founder cold emailed me. He was doing his PhD and at Berkeley. And this was before the current AI mania. And the founder had written a paper as an undergrad with a guy named Juan Maldacena. And Juan is like one of the most famous, most highly regarded string theorists in the world. And like for me, like that anecdote alone was like, okay, this guy is incredibly talented. And so kind of knowing what signals to pick up on of like, okay, writing a paper with Juan, as I put it in the email, because he knew that I would pick up on the code of who Juan was as an undergrad, like that alone kind of means he has a minimum, he's like a minimum 2600 rated technical ability. And then you have to go through all the other traits, but like being able to pick up just from a cold email that because he published a paper with Juan as an undergrad, and it'd be different if it was a paper with Juan as a grad student, then the lower bar is like 2,300 or something. But to do it as an undergrad means it's 2,600. And so it's like definitely worth taking the meeting and worth investing in. And I think very few VCs would have known just from a cold email where he said, I published a paper with Juan, they wouldn't be able to pick up on that signal. And so it's very useful.
My hunch would also be that the fact that he did research on you and knew that you would kind of get this is also part of that equation.
Yeah, and that meta that he like had the riz to just say like published a paper with Juan, not Juan Maldacena. I loved that. I thought that was like, it was like good meta game. And that matters too. And this founder has really good sales ability.
Yeah.
And so that like that's the magic, is he had very strong technical ability and incredible charisma, empathy. So anyways, fun to work with. His name is Matan Grinberg.
I want to do a hypothetical.
Yeah.
Where imagine you're stripped of all credentials, achievements, cash, network, all that stuff, and you're given $10 billion, and then you're tasked with creating the modern Bell Labs. What do you do? How do you build it?
I call up my friend Casey Handmer, who I've known since grad school. Um, honestly, I know who to call. I call 5 friends, and Casey's one of them. And I tell Casey, like, you know, pause Terraform Industries, and we're building the next Bell Labs. From there, I mean, look, part of the secret of Bell Labs was that it was attached to a monopoly that was
Mhm.
cash flowing incredible amounts of money. Um, and so I think the next thing is find, when you get to start with $10 billion, what is, like, how do you turn 10 billion into a very, very high probability, like, cash machine? Because I think 10 billion is probably not enough to, like, sustain
Mm.
a Bell Labs. So how do you turn 10 billion into something that is, like, with very high probability within 10 years become something that generates a few billion minimum?
I know Charlie Munger talked about basically like if you wanted to reverse engineer like a multi-hundred billion or $1 trillion company, one of the best ways that you could do it would be through a beverage, basically like recreating
Yeah.
Coca-Cola, because there's like
Red Bull.
no taste
Yeah.
memory and all these different things. Which business would you start off the
I
back of
think
that?
if I had 10 billion, one would be the chemicals industry.
Mm.
I think the chemicals industry is one of the most underrated industries in the world for many reasons. First of all, chemicals is bigger than oil and gas. Like, most years, the sales of chemicals is bigger than oil and gas. Call it 5 trillion a year of sales. Oil and gas is like 4 trillion or so. So it's a big
Big
industry.
industry that no one's touching.
Big industry. And most people think of chemicals as, first of all, most people don't think about it. If they do think about it, they don't know what it is. They think it's commodity industry. A lot of chemicals, probably half, is like raw commodity. So making like plastics or things that are almost just direct byproducts of the oil and gas industry. But a large fraction of the industry, I'd say at least 25%, is like hardcore specialty chemicals that are actually very rare. A lot of times there's only one company in the world that will make some specialty chemical. And if they, like, I work with one Elon company that there was a chemical that, like, they lost access to probably 3 years ago, and they were going to have to shut down operations. Seriously. And
How much of a like economic impact did that one chemical have on the like company?
I mean, it would
Like
have
billions of
delayed
dollars?
them by months.
Going into making the investment in SpaceX, it was not the same situation as is today, where Tesla is worth $1.5 trillion, and Elon has multiple multi-hundred-billion-dollar companies just sitting on the sidelines. And going in 2019, I think Tesla, I remember looking, it was worth like 40, 50 billion. And so going into the SpaceX investment at 36 and then later like 47 or something, it was a very different environment.
Yeah, people thought I was insane. It was
Yeah.
it will sound crazy today because today it's such an obvious consensus investment. At the time, it was insanely non-obvious and non-consensus. And, like, the original investments conversation was the most controversial, contentious conversation I've ever been a part of. Like, we vote on a scale of 1 to 10, and one, like, general partner voted a 1 out of 10. It's the only one I've ever seen at Sequoia. But I didn't take no for an answer, and made people fly down to LA, and we ended up deciding to do a $20 million toehold then, and then people got it once they could actually use the product. But it was a good lesson for me. And for what it's worth, the person who voted a 1 is an incredible investor himself. It's just that no one ever has full
It's like
information on the
context.
context on
Yeah.
on everything. And I was new at Sequoia, so people didn't yet trust me. And it's just a good lesson to me in a lot of things. Like, one, to pay attention to the new teammates, that who knows where the best ideas will come from. And two, to try to have some humility that in areas that I'm not an expert in, like I don't know anything.
I do love this line from Charlie Munger where he says, "You're smart and I'm right, and sooner or later you'll figure out I'm right." So when you run into a situation where people don't share the same view as you do, how do you kind of like shift their perspective?
I think it's like really hard to change people's perspective in the moment, but I think you can change people's perspective over time. So like in the case of SpaceX, the initial investment was 1 month or so of relentlessly pursuing, and this, like, I don't mean this can easily be misinterpreted because $20 million is a lot of money, but in the scale of when you're asking for a $600 million investment, 20 million is a small amount. So it's like a small, consolation prize from 1 month of persistence, including like being willing to pay for a plane to fly, everyone to LA from the Bay Area. But then over the next 6 months, I sent an update probably every 3 weeks or so to all the decision makers, explaining to them what's happening with SpaceX and in the industry and with Starlink. And after 6 months of people getting an update like every 3 weeks or so, one, they can see how obsessed you are with the idea and like your own conviction. They're realizing that this isn't just some flash in the pan. He's coming like with some whimsical idea. Like he's actually obsessed with this and believes in it. Two, for people to get the longitudinal data of okay, I'm seeing, step by step, and I'm seeing the first derivative and second derivative and third derivative of progress. Like you can oftentimes change people's minds that way. And this is true in everything. It's true in information warfare. This is true across the board. Like it's very hard to change people's minds with one data point, but you can, over time
kind of re-psyop them a little bit.
Correct.
If you had to you had to leave Sequoia and go work at a startup, can't be an Elon startup, which startup would that be?
I mean,
why?
the obvious answer would be I would go to an Elon startup. If it can't be an Elon startup, a lot of this is personal preference. I would probably go to Neros, FPV drone company I invested in. I think the guys.
I know the guys.
Noloff. And so these guys make first person view drones. These are like drones that pilots put VR goggles on to pilot. So you're like in the drone. These are the most performant, kind of shortest range drones. They've completely changed the war in Ukraine. Something like 60, 70% of the casualties in Ukraine have been from FPV drones. It's just unbelievably important. And I think we're still at the very beginning of FPV drones, but it's like the fastest changing part of the war right now. And these guys are just so good, and the product market fit is so strong. Like the company is absolutely ripping. And for myself, I'm very passionate about defense, war. Like I deployed to Afghanistan, supporting the US military. I'm, still pretty involved in military affairs, in things that I don't really talk about the details too much, but I'm still very involved in something I care a lot about and want America to be incredibly strong. So probably go work for 22-year-olds at Neros and they'd kick my ass, but be fun.
When you initially made that decision on Neros, what kind of got you over the line? What were the key data points on those guys? And I know Soren, he was like a world champion drone racer. So that's obviously helping. But what other actions did they take that led you to make that call?
So I met Soren. I was introduced by a guy named Ian Roundtree, who's a seed investor. He was the first investor, like led the pre-seed in Neros. And he introduced me, and like I should have invested the second I met Soren. Something I've learned about myself and the way I invest, I generally don't make very good decisions in my first meeting. And so almost everything I invest in, I like to track the company for like at least a couple months to see the rate of progress, like make sure I can't get like the ideas just stuck in my head, see how the founders actually execute. And so with hindsight, I wish I would have done the pre-seed with Ian, but I ended up investing about 2 or 3 months later. And so number one thing was Soren was literally the world champion FPV drone racer in multi-GP. There's 2 professional drone racing leagues. Like he was world champion in multi-GP. He was also professional in drone racing league, the other DRL, and on TV and all of this. Next is, Olaf is also just off the charts exceptional. Next is very early into the company, Soren just got on a plane and went to Ukraine to just go, 1, learn what was happening on the front lines, and 2, try to like coach people and how to be better FPV pilots. And that like that attitude of being willing to just go like fly all the way to Ukraine, go to wars. He was probably 19 or 20 at the time. Like just love that attitude. Um, the next thing was Soren, when he was in high school, he started a small drone parts marketplace. I think it was called like FPV Supply or something like that. And um, anyway, it's called FPV Supply. It helped people find parts for hobbyists to build FPV drones. And that just showed like entrepreneurial instinct. Also, you grew up in Alaska, like you, and then they moved to Vermont. But that kind of, I think it's very important to have some, not just be a technologist, not just, be an expert in a domain, to show that entrepreneurial energy. And so I don't know, all those things did it for me.
I'm like pretty confident that he also made titanium phone cases.
I think that's right.
Yeah, I think I remember that from our first interview.
And for what it's worth, one more thing. I think my philosophy with, I think they had exactly the right philosophy with FPV, which is one, it's all going to be about supply chain, just scaled manufacturing and doing that in America. And these guys are real experts in supply chain, which was kind of evidenced by starting a parts marketplace as teenagers. Next thing, I think beyond just supply chain and scale, the next most important thing is being really, really good at radios and comms, like being just unbelievably strong EEs to where you'll be able to handle jamming and just always like stay at the absolute cutting edge of electronic warfare. And Olaf is like he's an electronics genius.
Details.
He's an electronics genius. And because of my military experience, I knew how important comms are. And I was following the EW side of Ukraine very closely, in part as a SpaceX investor, where Starlink was operational very early into the war and changed the trajectory of the war. And, Starlink is the first like really software defined, backhaul in history. And so like being able to take it, doing what Starlink was doing in very, very long ranges and low power, to be able to do that in short, distances with higher power and like huge jamming, which makes it obviously a much harder problem. Like I just knew how important that would be.
I don't know if I've ever heard someone ask about basically what Elon looks for in capital partners. He really likes you guys. He really likes Antonio Gracias and Valor. He really likes VY. What specific things does he look for when he's considering having a capital partner?
I think number one, being willing to like do work. There's the famous stories of Antonio sleeping in the Tesla factories during 2018 production hell.
Yeah.
And I mean,
weren't they doing that as well on the Roadster ramp?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And I mean, it's just like hard to explain how much respect I have for Antonio, and like, you're in your stripes when you're willing to do something like that. So being willing to work. And number two, like so many people leak things, and it's hard to, it's like, this may sound so simple, but when you're trying to really bend the arc on the future, like sometimes you need element of surprise. And like most investors are leaky, and this is a very low bar, but just not leaking things, I think, is a good start.
Shut the fuck up when you have information.
Yeah, shut the fuck up. And I think third thing is kind of like being there in all weather, like good times and bad. And someone like Antonio, I think, has done this better than almost any investor in history.
I think underestimating any of Elon's companies is really stupid.
Yes.
I think,
and many people still do. It's crazy.
I know. He gets a $1 trillion pay package. If he gets to 8.5 trillion market cap or something, and someone still wants to short the stock, it's probably not a good idea. I think there's different phases for companies. Like in year 7 or 8 of SpaceX, it's kind of almost going bankrupt. Same with Tesla. Yeah. It takes a very long time to bake these technical companies. When you look at something like Boring Company, Steve Davis, Why do you think people underestimate boring code right now? Like what do they not get?
I think people are really bad at thinking about nonlinear things. Like most humans just think in terms of linear things, and a lot of Elon's companies are very nonlinear.
Mm.
And yes, I think people just don't understand at all where the boring company is. People think boring machines is easy because they've been around a long time, and because
There's a bunch of subway tunnels
there's
dug.
there's subway tunnels and they're dug by municipalities and all of this. I asked Steve, to stack rank how hard. Steve was a very early SpaceX employee and is a genius engineer and played a huge role in kind of building some of the early SpaceX rockets and vehicles because he was in charge of Dragon. Um, I asked him to stack rank Falcon 1, Falcon 9, Falcon 9 reusable Starship, like put in that spectrum of technical difficulty where like kind of the current vision of the boring machine is, and so like what they're working towards and are close to. They call it zero people in tunnel, Z-pit, continuous mining. So like that's the goal. So having a boring machine that can operate with no people in the tunnel, continuous mining. And he said it's a little harder than Falcon 9, easier than Falcon 9, reusable. And so just think about that. It's like this device is harder engineering than the Falcon 9. Um, but the people don't understand that because they just look at one boring machine and they compare it to all the others. They don't understand the difference. People all don't understand the difference between like a Falcon 1 and a Falcon 9 or a Starship. And so anyways, like I think people just really don't understand what's going to happen and how fast it's going to happen once Boring Company hits the milestone of like having reliable like Z-pit continuous mining. And at that point, so like right now it's almost like how SpaceX until 2009 or so did the Falcon 1, then was building the original Falcon 9. It's like those 8 years or so where like there wasn't that much progress. The only progress you had 3 failed Falcon 1 flights and 2 successful ones, and maybe some, failed Falcon 9 tests. But I think once Falcon 9 started flying missions reliably, then the perception of the company went to one level above, like a big jump, a 10x jump in perception. I think the same thing will happen once Boring Company hits like Z-pit continuous mining and is like actually just operating regularly and has a bunch of these. And you can't go make 100 boring machines before the design is locked. And so it's like you can't go make 100 Falcon 9s before the first one works a lot. And so that's kind of, once we hit this milestone, then they'll be able to make a lot of them. But people are fools for sleeping on these companies.
There's this line from Elon that I've heard, which is people respond to precedents and superlatives. How do you think about that?
I've never heard that. I mean, look, I think that's a good line. I think if I was to map that onto what I'm just saying, like I said, people aren't very good at nonlinear thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so the precedent is once you've made it, you've actually demonstrated that you've made it through this nonlinear regime, and like you've actually hit the next nonlinear threshold. So you've jumped to that next plateau. And I think that if I was to map the superlative, it's that, like I said, people don't really know the difference between Falcon 1, Falcon 9, Starship. Like if you just go ask someone like, what's the difference between these rockets? Unless someone cares a little bit about rockets or thinks about engineering, they're not going to know the difference at all. But people can kind of intuitively, they understand, they can see a rocket landing and they can see the difference between, like I can't tell the difference of the payload mass or the orbit you can get to.
But
or
if it
like
blows up or it lands,
if it blows up, that's superlative. Or if like the rocket lands, like this is a new paradigm, it's superlative that I can understand. And so I don't know, that's maybe how I, doing an Optimus demo where you have the robot. I was at the Tesla event, call it a year ago, whatever, in Hollywood at one of those.
Yeah, the whole city that they built.
The whole city that they built, and they had a bunch of optimists walk out and
Talking about that, that's the only other person that I know of that's built a city is Mr. Beast
yeah,
for Beast Games, but go on.
yeah. Well, and SpaceX fully built a city, and that Starbase is now officially incorporated as a city. But like that showmanship of like actually walking out 20 Optimuses or whatever it was, like the way, I mean, my mind was pretty blown, and I think it's lost on video. But when they came out, because they were walking from probably like 30, 40 feet away from me down a road, and I really couldn't tell, like, are these human actors or are they, or are they robots? And I was like, look, initially you look at the face as you would with a human. And so then I started like looking down the body. And then when you get to the waist, it was very narrow,
It's like
non-human like. And so until I got to the waist, it looked like it could still be a human. And that's when I was like, oh man. And I knew that because it's like the Tesla event and, I knew it was going to be Optimuses, but I wanted to verify it with my brain. And when you see the torso is not human like, it's a very kind of profound, like, oh wow, this is actually a robot. Hell yeah, we're getting closer
we're
to the
living in the
future.
future a little
We're
bit.
living in the future. So that's that superlative experience that I think has nonlinear benefit in the psychology, where people start to understand, okay, this is close, this is real, in a way that they can't understand just looking at a chart. And this is something I think part of why Elon is so good at attracting capital is because he's so good at kind of these milestone superlative events and moments that capture the imagination and just like show you what's coming.
You said you have to be willing to step into the fire to learn. What has been a moment where you stepped into the fire to learn something?
I mean, many, many, many examples for me. One, I was doing my PhD and I got recruited to work at DARPA, which was not what I was planning on doing. Like I was planning on finishing my PhD. Honestly, at the time, I thought I'd probably be a professor. And then this totally orthogonal opportunity came up to go work at DARPA and specifically to deploy to Afghanistan. And it's like, okay, I'm in. I want to serve my country. And like that is maximum going into the fire. And that I went into a war zone and like actually saw like,
Some stuff.
Yeah, I saw stuff. And like it is really hard to explain how quickly you learn when there's that type of feedback and that type of danger. And you just, like, to give you an example, and this is not of like the danger, but there was one event where like basically every Friday I would go from one base to another to brief a general. And normally the drive is like crazy traffic in Kabul. And first I traveled all over Afghanistan, but I would normally be in Kabul for this briefing every Friday. And so normally it's like a 45-minute to an hour drive with only a couple miles, just horrible traffic. And one Friday we got there in 15 minutes or so, like there was no traffic. And we were driving from a small base called Green Village to a bigger base called HQ ISAF, the headquarters of like the International Coalition. And so we got there in 15 minutes. And like immediately when I got on the base, it's like something is wrong. It should not, like whenever
Just vibes are off.
Like vibes are off. Why was there no traffic? I immediately went to like the intelligence kind of briefing center and just started asking everyone like, what's going on? What's in the intel reports? And it's one of these things where like people could tell the vibes were off, but there wasn't clear intel on what was coming. And then maybe like an hour or two later, maybe even a couple more, 3 hours later, there was a pretty major coordinated attack. I'm trying to remember the month. This was like March or April 2012. And so if you were to put in like HQ ISAF coordinated attack, like green zone or something, you would find the attack. So there's something like, 6 different bases that were attacked all at the same time around the country. And like at this base, they launched a rocket into a guard tower. And then so around the base, you have like the actual base. And then outside the base, you have like the green zone where you had a lot of like Afghan army. And you get badged in, but it's not as much security as going in the actual like kind of NATO base equivalent. And so like fighters went into the green zone, and it's one of these things where like the human intuition was so clear that something was wrong, but our intel didn't like reflect it. And so like all of my instincts told me something was wrong, and I couldn't find it in the data. And so for me, this was like very profound realization that like we need to improve the data. We like something is wrong when your instincts tell you that something is off, and then you don't have the intel to reflect it. And 3 hours later, you go through an attack. So I mean, that's the literal definition of going into the fire and just kind of learning how quickly you learn in these situations. My brain for probably 3 weeks was just like obsessing over how could we have known what was going to
happen.
Yeah. And there were lots of ways to know, but I won't say them here.
Yeah. I know you've talked a lot about like curiosity, and why curiosity is like so important. And I when I look at your past, it's almost like obsessive curiosity about a specific subject matter for some certain amount of time, and almost in the pursuit of becoming the kind of 2800 chess master. Like maybe it's CSGO
maybe
at the
2700. I've never been 2800 in anything, but I've been 2700 in a couple things.
So 2700.
I was definitely 2700 in Counter-Strike.
Yeah. Really?
Oh yeah. I mean, I played on like some of the best teams in North America.
Crazy.
I played in Cal Invite and went to top tournaments. And
what made you like initially get into that? Because I know Soren and Olaf are both very obsessed with Counter-Strike.
I actually didn't know. It's amazing.
Or at least one time.
The honest answer is one of my best friends was obsessed with it. And so he showed me at his house on a Friday night. His name's Brennan. Thank you, Brennan. Like kind of took away 3-4 years of my childhood. I'm just kidding. They were very good years and I learned a lot. But no, like my friend did it. And I think a lot of like when parents ask me, they're like, my kid is obsessed with video games, like it's so bad. I kind of take the opposite view. Like I think kids being obsessed with almost anything is like, it's better to be obsessed than apathetic. And I really learned a lot playing Counter-Strike, and a couple of things. One, at the time, to be good at Counter-Strike, it was an advantage to understand some basic computer networking, because to be able to pick up like an extra 10 milliseconds of, lower latency mattered, like actually mattered. Second, to be able to like lower the jitter of your home network, like that mattered a lot. And so like I got into networking, would use Wireshark to like try to understand when our home network was having issues, and
try to understand. Fuck.
Yeah.
I imagine a little bit of that.
A lot of that. But so like it got me into networking, which was very important for me later in life because the company I co-founded like did a lot of networking. I also like we used insane tactics and teamwork. It's 5v5, and we would spend. So I would play Counter-Strike for the 3 years that I was doing it so seriously. I would play 10 hours a day, something like that. Like
10 hours a day for 3 years.
Yeah.
Is this during like high school?
This is 8th, 9th, 10th grade.
Okay.
I mean, I played on some of the best teams in the world at the time, and I made some money, not too much money, but I made,
like a few $1,000.
Make $10K a year, something like that for 2 years. So I mean, which at the time, the prize pool for CPL, which is the biggest tournament, was $50K for the winning teams. So it was like $10K per person. And I never played on the high level at CPL, only simply because I was so young. Like the teams I played there, but I played a lot of local SoCal lands, and I won a bunch of land tournaments and stuff. And you'd make $1,000, $2,000 a time. And so anyways, I was really obsessed with Counter-Strike, learned an insane amount of teamwork. It was like professional athlete level communications and coordination. When someone would say get killed on your team, the whole team has to move their position to change the angles. Like people don't understand in Counter-Strike, like at the highest level, everyone has basically the same reactions for the most part. And the difference maker is your understanding of like the angles of the game.
Hmm.
For example, like you want to, if there's like a map, like, there was this map, DE Aztec. I have all the maps still in my head. I haven't played Counter-Strike in almost 20 years. And I can still remember like every pixel of these maps.
I feel you for the
Yeah.
maps that I've played, yes.
And so like for DE Aztec, there was this thing where you go through these two doors. Like if you're, a terrorist, you're on offense, you go through these two doors and it's this very wide open area on the other side, like long range. I call it a couple 100 meters in the human perception. And there's like a big central kind of like dipped courtyard that people can't be in, so no one can be there. People can either be kind of like behind the door, they can be straight down like one direction, they can kind of be behind some boxes or in the other doors 45 degrees, or they can be in the other directions, like 4 places where people can be. You want to have like 2 people on your team be at 90-degree angles to each other, so that if someone, when they come through the door, almost like pixel level accuracy, the second like their first pixel would come out, if they were to come and their orientation was looking at one of your guys, and if they ended up having faster reaction times and killing your guy, that the other person would have like almost guaranteed ability to kill them, because it's 90-degree opposite angle. And so it's like impossible for them to kill that person, then scan and kill the other person. So it's like the worst case, you trade 1-to-1. And so now it's 4v4, but you're giving away the position via sound. So then that person's going to be at a slight disadvantage like the next time someone comes through the doors, but it's still like way better than losing, like 2 people.
And also everything is like timed when the round starts and which positions you can possibly be in based on the start location.
100%. But so like the second one person comes through the door, first of all, you have to have like the angle such that you have pixel level accuracy, and you have to be in the other team's head to know, like, if it's been 15 seconds and you haven't seen anything, then it's more likely that they're going to bomb site B rather than bomb site A. And so we should start rotating a little bit proactively and having this synchronization with your team to know like literally how to do these small rotations. It's similar to playing soccer or something like that. And it's just like adults, at least adults at that time. Now, like myself, I have 2 little kids. And so I know what goes into these video games. People do not understand like how the level of strategy and the level of teamwork and coordination when in these games. It was literally like professional soccer level kind of obsession and teamwork. But it's a young person's game, because your reflexes by the time you're like 22, 23, your reflexes are like nowhere near as good as a 16-year-old's or 15-year-old's. And so on and on. But I had very bad grades in high school as a result of all the Counter-Strike, including an F in Algebra 2. But
like a 1.8 or 1.8.
There was a period in time when my GPA was 1.8. It didn't end up there, but there was a period of time where I got an F in Algebra 2. I ended up doing like a summer remediation of it. And look, I got a PhD in mathematical physics. Like, I'm good at math. The F was, I just didn't want to go. I hated school. I could not stand my teachers or a lot of my peers. And I just felt like it was a waste of time. I'd rather be like screwing around on the computer or playing Counter-Strike or, doing other things.
What was your thought process in school? I had a weird situation where I think I was probably in like 10th grade, and I talked with one of my teachers. It was actually Algebra 2.
Yeah.
Where I was like failing that class or something just because I didn't really care. And then my geometry teacher, pulled me aside because I really enjoyed him and his class. So I got 114% in his class and Fs and everything else.
Yeah.
But he pulls me aside. He's basically like, you gotta get good grades. And I was like, why? And he's like, to get into a good college. And I was like, why? And he's like, to get a good job. And I was like, well, I don't want a good job, and so then I don't need college, and so I don't need these grades. So what's the point? And then he was like, Ty, I can't argue with that. And I just did my own thing after that.
Yeah, it's similar for me. One, like I was a hacker as a kid, and the hacker mentality is that you'll always be able to find like a loophole, a backdoor, side door. And so I was just willing to bet on myself. Like I knew I was going to be fine. I wasn't worried about it. Next thing, I had some like really adversarial things happen. I'm going to work backwards. Like the most formative thing was in 7th grade. So I'll get there in a second. But in 10th grade, I had an experience with a math teacher. I'm not going to name him because I don't need to be a jerk, but on our first test, he gave me a 0 on the test, even though I got every answer right. And I went up to him and I was like, like, hey, you gave me a 0, even though I got every answer right. Like, what's happening? He said, I think you cheated. And I'm like, and he said in a very aggressive way, I'm like,
because you didn't show your work?
I didn't show any work. And it was, for me, the problems were so boring that like part of how I'd make them just like 5% more interesting is I'd do it all in my head just to make it like a little bit more interesting. And so anyways, he gave me a 0. He said, I think you cheated. I was like, no, I didn't cheat. Like, I was like, you can ask me anything you want. I'm like, ask me calculus problems. And he was like, nope, I think you cheated. You get a 0. I'm like, I got every answer right. Like, you have to help me, like prove to you, like ask me anything you want right now. I was like, nope, you get a 0.
He just didn't like you?
He didn't like me. And so I went and candidly, I would read books. I'd read science fiction books in his class all day. I would just be there reading. So I actually counted the books I read that year. I read 67 books in school, only in my classes that year. This is easy stuff. It's like Ender's Game, stuff like this. So I went to the vice principal of the school and told him what happened and that I got every answer right. And he sided with the teacher. And at that point, I was just like, this is such a joke. These people are such jokers. Like later that year, I took the SAT and like I did pretty well. And the school actually reported me to the college board and said that they suspect that I cheated on the SAT. So that's like,
preemptively?
Just preemptively. Like that's how adversarial my relationship was with my school. And at that point, I just stopped going to school. I was like, I'm done with these people. So I ended up mainly going to community college then. And then I left high school early. I took my California high school proficiency exam, like CHSP. It's a basically GED equivalency, and just left and went to community college. Cause at that point I could not handle it. But if you want, I can tell you the 7th and 8th grade.
I would love to hear.
Man, so 7th grade story is pretty unbelievable. I've got 2. These are good stories. I don't think I've ever told these publicly. Anyone from my school can verify these stories. These are crazy. Okay, so the first one, I went to public school. My school was 7th through 12th grade. So it's kind of weird to mix middle school and high school. And, as a 7th grader, I was 4'10". Most kids start puberty sometime around 7th grade. And it's like, I probably started puberty at the end of 7th grade rather than the beginning. And so there was very high variance for kids' size, like boys' size on the first day of 7th grade. I was 4'10".
I was like 4 or 5 until I think like 9th or 10th grade, and I randomly shot up a foot.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's tough. So my second day of 7th grade, I'm 4'10", and I'm walking between my first and second period. And there's this kid, Vinny Taramina, who was from a pretty powerful family in the school. His dad had sold a trash company, per our earlier conversation, to Waste Management for $500 million. I think it's called like Taramina Sortation or something like that, but just Taramina Waste Management. So they had sold this company. And so that's a lot of money, especially in the 90s. And I believe they had 5 kids out of the 6 grades in the school, maybe only 4, but I think it was 5. And so it's just like, you have a lot of power when you have 5 big Italian kids out of 6 grades. And so
they were Italian too.
They were Italian.
Incredible.
I know. and they have
Truth is stranger than fiction.
Stranger than fiction. And they had a lot of money and all of this. And so my second day of 7th grade, I'm walking from my first to second period, and this kid, Vinny Taramina, is like standing on a planter. Basically, it's like a 18-inch planter, and he's surrounded by his friends. And I'm just walking randomly through the crowd, and he points at me. He's like, your new name is Joel. And I was like what? Like me? and I'm surrounded by other people. He's like, your new name is Joel. And I'm like, okay. And I just keep walking. And I don't remember like exactly which period it happened for, but one of my next periods, I call it 2 periods later, I show up and it's the second day and I hadn't even been to every class yet with every teacher. And I show up in a class and the teacher calls roll and they don't call my name. And so I say like, hey, like, excuse me, like, I think I'm in the right place, but you didn't call my name. They're like, what's your name? It's like, my name is Shaun Maguire. And the teacher's like, no, I don't see you on the roll. So I go up to the podium where she's standing with like a paper roll card. And she had crossed out Shaun Maguire and written in Joel. And I'm like, oh, my name's not Joel. Like, it's Shaun Maguire. And some kid yells out, I'll just name him, Kyle Tomberlin, yells out, he's a good guy. He's a fireman now. Like, it's hilarious. He yells out, like, my name's not Joel, it's Shaun Maguire. And he yells it out in like a voice like that. And like people laugh. And I'm so confused. And I'm like, no, my name's not Joel. It's Shaun Maguire. And then like 6 kids yell out. They're like,
Just
my
mocking you.
name's not Joel, it's Shaun Maguire. And then the whole class is laughing. And I'm just like, I'm so stunned. I'm like, what is happening? I'm so confused. And so I tell the teacher, I'm like, that's me. And she marks me or whatever. And I go sit down. And then this happens in every class I go to, like with every teacher. And whenever I try to correct the teacher, and then these kids, these kids are smart, and they go to the teachers ahead of time, and they're like, "This Shaun kid is a class clown. Like he actually, his name is Joel, but he's gonna mess with you." And so then the teachers are confused, and then like the class is laughing, and they think I'm a class clown, and it's like, and they literally renamed me to Joel. Like I'm not joking. They literally renamed me to Joel on my second day of 7th grade. And for my whole high school experience, like people called me Joel. And not everyone, but like most of the kids and like the cool kids called me Joel. I still today, like it's programmed in me. If you yell, I shouldn't say this on, online, but fuck it. Like if someone yells Joel, I'll turn around the same way if someone yells like Ty, even from 100 meters away, like you'll turn around.
Even if they say T.
If someone says T, like you'll turn around. If someone says Joel, like I turn around the same way I would for Shaun. It's just hardwired in me. And there's still people from my high school that still call me Joel. I went to a high school reunion like 10 years ago before I had any online presence or any of these things. And some of the kids there only knew me as Joel. Like they didn't know that my name is actually Shaun. Like they did not know my name is actually Shaun. And this was one of these things, like, it was just such a weird way to start 7th grade where you get renamed. It's just like, man, fuck this place. For what it's worth, I ended up seeing Vinny at a party after like
his name was Vinny?
Yeah, Vinny Taramino. So I ended up seeing Vinny after college, and
Vinny the Italian with
Vinny Taramino,
the dad with the trash collection company.
Trash company that sold for $500 million. And so I ended up saying to Vinny, I'm like, dude, like what was going through your mind? And he's like, you know what, man? He's like, I was really hungover. And he's like, you look like a kid I met named Joel Jacobson. And he's like, it just came to me. He's like, I'm sorry. And
your high school experience is ruined over someone being hungover?
Because the kid was hungover on his second day of 10th grade and just randomly decides to rename me. And it stuck. And so I was like, wow, this is parody.
So you're just getting hazed immediately.
Yeah. So that was one story that just is like, man, this place is like, fuck this place. The second thing, and this is like really funny. My school was Lord of the Flies. Like it's really hard to explain what this place was like. And we had a PE class. Coach Traeger was the instructor. And I think we would meet 3 times a week. And we had to be there. It started early. We had to be there at like 7:30 or something like that. And it's like 90-minute PE class. And this guy, Coach Traeger, would always be 15 minutes late, we all had to go change in the locker room. We all wore a uniform. It's just like, it's public school. It's like very cheap, like mesh blue basketball shorts and a gray t-shirt that said Sea Kings on it, which was our mascot. And one day this kid, who was like a very charismatic kid in the grade, he decided to rip off his sleeves just to be cool. So he shows up to like the beginning of class, and Coach Trigger walks in. He's, as I said, he's always 15 minutes late. And he's like, LA, what happened to your sleeves? And LA's like, oh my gosh. He's like, he's so smooth. He's like, you know, I got a hole in one of the, like,
Creates
in
an
one
entire
of the sleeves.
story.
It's like, you got a hole in one of the sleeves and it didn't look good. And like, it just kept growing. He's like, so I had to rip the one sleeve off. It's like, but then when I had the one sleeve off, he's like, I felt like I had to rip the other one off because it wasn't symmetrical. It's like, so I took the other sleeve off, and it's like a good story. And so Coach Trigger's like, okay. And it's public school, so you don't get like another shirt. And so the next day, probably 5 or 6 more kids of LA's friends, they all come with their sleeves ripped off. And Coach Trigger's like, guys, what happened to your sleeves? And they're like, oh, like same thing as LA. Like I got a hole, and and like, and so like it didn't look good, and so I had to rip it off. And then when I ripped one off, like it wasn't symmetrical, so I had to rip off the other. So like there's like 6 kids. So then like the next day, it's like 25 kids, and so then like the next day, the 4th day, these kids, because this guy was only 15 minutes late, these kids, and it's like, it's so funny to look back on it, but they would go to all the kids and they would rip people's, like, they would chase kids down and they would rip their sleeves off. And it's just a way of like showing dominance over other kids. And I didn't want these kids, like, I didn't care about the sleeves, but I didn't want to be dominated by these motherfuckers. And so I was a really fast runner.
Were you like preparing mentally through those days as you see more and more sleeves coming off?
I am an extremely fast runner, and this is not the best way to justify it, but like I've won 4 marathons or something like that. And I've done that without training or trying. And, my marathon PR, my pace is like 5 minutes, 37 seconds, minute per mile. And that's literally without training. Like that's just, I'm fast. And I had a friend, Chris Ringstrom. We were the 2 fastest kids in the grade. Chris ended up running the 100 at Stanford. And Chris and we didn't want these kids to rip our sleeves. So for weeks, like for many weeks, every morning, I swear to God, every morning, we'd have 20 plus kids chasing us for like 15 minutes. They would chase us. We had a pretty big campus, and there was 2 big fields and like a lot of other just like cement. And we would literally get chased by at least 20 kids for about 10 minutes every morning for weeks, just to not let they want to show that they're dominant. And we were the last 2 kids without our sleeves ripped. And so we would just go run like crazy to not get our sleeves ripped. It's Lord of the Flies. Like it's absolutely insane. And they never ripped our sleeves. And there's one thing where our school was close to a bay. It was in Orange County, California. It's close to the Back Bay. And a lot of seagulls it was like their hangout spot in the morning almost every day was on one of our fields. Mm-hmm. And so we would like run into the seagulls and hundreds of seagulls would take off when we'd run into them. And they would invariably, like, the seagulls shit when they take off, like, because it's like they're digesting while they're sitting there, and then they poop when they start flying away. So hundreds of seagulls would take off, and like a small percent, 5% would take shits. And like almost every morning, like 1 or 2 kids would get shit on that. And it's just this, like, it's hard to even explain what this was like. And this is my 7th grade experience. It was like getting renamed to Joel and running away from wild
people that
feral
want to tear
packs
your shit
of
off.
kids that want to tear my sleeves off just to establish dominance. And I'll share one more on this. Like, this is a quick one. My school was very good at tennis. It was like it's a big thing in the high school, and Corona Del Mar High School. And so we had 9 tennis courts on campus. And one of the activities we did in PE for like 6 weeks was like paddle tennis. There's these plastic rackets with holes in them. And you'd play 3v3 on the tennis court with a tennis ball and these plastic rackets. And it was round robin. Like if your team won, you'd move up. And if you lost, you'd move down. And these, like there was this one team of 3 guys, and like they were 3 of the more athletic guys in the grade, and they kind of made it. They're like, another way they would establish dominance is when they would be playing people, they would deliberately try to peg them with the ball. Uh,
You're just surrounded by assholes.
I was surrounded by assholes. And so there was this like team of 3 guys, one of whom again was this LA kid, and they were good. And they would peg. There was this one kid, John Moffitt. I shouldn't name him, but like he was a. I'm sorry for naming you. He's a tall, very sweet kid, like very awkward kid at the time, and they would just peg him relentlessly with the ball. But I was my dad was a very strong tennis player, and like I grew up playing very competitive tennis, and um and so like I was better than these kids, and so because they would go try to peg other kids, like I would peg.
You wanted to seek justice.
I would seek justice on behalf of like this kid John and all the other kind of nerds, and I would make it my sport to peg these kids, and so they just absolutely hated me. And it's like my whole school experience. Like I had teachers that will give me zeros for like not showing my work on tests, and I have kids that are like trying to rip off my sleeves to establish dominance, and a kid renaming me. It's like, I don't even want to be here.
And then you go home and you play CS for 10 hours.
Yeah. So it's like, it was a kind of an unusual, and maybe this is usual, I don't know. But for me, like, I just did not want to be in school.
I think everything, we discovered a lot more context to Shaun.
There's more context. Yeah.
We got more context.
It's important to have a chip on your shoulder.
You got a few chips.
Yeah, I've got a few chips.
Getting back to Elon and having, I think Elon has got a few very close relationships that he's just had for a very long time. Gwynne Shotwell is one of them. Steve Davis, I think, is going to be another. I forgot the guy that is working on Neuralink, but it's the same thing. How do the people that really succeed, where they're working kind of on one of the Elon companies with Elon, how do they work?
Yeah, my personal opinion is that one, like the way Elon operates is kind of anyone can raise their hand to do a job. And
Have you actually been in one of these meetings where that happened? Or like some guy?
It depends on the context. But if someone like volunteers to do something, if they actually deliver on it, then great. Like they move up, and they'll be taken very seriously, and they kind of move up the next level. If they volunteer another time and they deliver, like they'll move up again. On the other extreme, if you say you can do something and you fail to do it, like you are done, or you're stuck there. So number one is like just being extremely competent and being willing to bet on your own competence and like always delivering and knowing your limit. Like it's okay to say, I don't think I can do this, or, I don't know how to do this, or I think someone else would be better for this. Like it's different to volunteer for something versus be assigned something. The next thing is very, very quickly learning that you need to go like 5 levels deep. You need to be able to handle like 5 levels of questions or so in anything. And I think the next thing is, a lot of loyalty. And I don't mean that, like, I think a lot of people would misinterpret that and think like, oh, it's blind loyalty. No, it's not blind loyalty. It's a understanding that Elon sees things other people don't see. I think of Elon like AlphaGo, where AlphaGo would make these moves that like Go players couldn't even understand why AlphaGo is making these moves. And then 17 moves later, like AlphaGo would just win. And they're like, holy crap, that was crazy. This is kind of like what it's like to work with Elon. We'll do these extremely
60 chess moves
that you just like people don't understand in the moment. And then you'll understand it a year later or 6 months later.
It'll look like prophetic.
And it will look prophetic. And so people that go and don't understand that, I that's challenging. And people that say like leak the plan, or like that's another type of loyalty. This is like, it's like trust in the system, trust in where you're going, like be like loyal to your teammates, be mission oriented. Like these are, if you have all of those things in addition to the like competence and being willing to bet on yourself, like you're going to do very well. And believe it or not, I think very few organizations like do those things. It sounds very simple, but like no one does that.
Yeah, it's very interesting because like in that, I guess in his organizations, you can't actually ask for responsibility and get it the first time in a way that a lot of things. It's
Yeah.
kind of even on with like interviews and stuff. For a very long time, I would ask, and I like sometimes it worked.
Yeah.
Right, and that's a amazing feeling. Do you think that he kind of takes a similar approach to investing, where you're basically backing someone based on some track record, with them saying, I'm going to go change this aspect of the future. And then, that's like the pre-seed and seed and so on.
So I think he's one of the greatest capital allocators of all time, obviously, with across all the different companies, across like, you know, investing in battery factories, like when he did, investing in AV when he did, to the point where like it actually works. Like a lot of people that invest in AV, it never worked. They were either too early or the earlier low Earth orbit constellation, internet constellations, like they were too early. The underlying phased array radio technologies hadn't, made it, weren't mature enough to where you could actually build a full system that, achieved the performance you needed to have, like to compete with terrestrial internet. He's this combination of like, I think such good instincts for where the technology is and like where it will be in the near term. So that's all I think pretty obvious. I think the thing that's maybe not obvious is I think he sizes his bets in very smart way. So like, I don't remember the exact year of when SpaceX started working on Starlink, but it was something like 2013, something like that. But it wasn't that serious of an effort. They were waiting until like Falcon 9 became reusable. Falcon 9 became reusable in 2016, roughly. I think there was 2 years of like working out the kinks. It was around 2018 is when I think Elon just fully understood that all the pieces are in place. Like the underlying phased array radio technology is good enough, and like reusability is really working, which means that the economics like of launch,
Cost to get mass to
cost
orbit.
to get mass to orbit is gonna be really, really favorable. And the number of missions you'll be able to fly per year is gonna increase a lot because it's just way easier rather than needing to make a new to build, now I think SpaceX now has done 170 flights in the last 12 months, like as of yesterday. And, you know, when we first invested, it was like 10 a year, something like that, 6 years ago.
So 17x in 6 years. That's not bad.
In terms of number of missions, like it's pretty wild. And the, like, by having reusability, it was a key point to be able to do a lot of flights per year. So you didn't have to make new rockets, new boosters, et cetera. Well, you still make the second stage, but, anyways, like he just has unbelievable intuition. And like the Starlink bet was a small bet. It was going, but it was like small to be learning so that you're paying close attention and you even know you need to make a small bet to know what the constraints are so that when the constraints get removed or improved, and then you can size the small bet to a medium bet. And then once the medium bet is really working and like the unit economics are good, then you can scale it to a big bet. And I think he's an absolute genius at sizing. Like, yes, he's a genius at understanding having intuition for the technologies and understanding what are the constraints. But I think he also is a genius at sizing his bets in a smart way. This is somewhere like a poker player needs to size their bets proportional to the quality of their cards,
And also like the amount of chips they have
100%.
and the chips on the other guys.
100%. And like hedge fund managers, a lot of times, like if they have some vague new idea, but they don't fully understand the business, like you'll put 1% of your fund into buying some new position just to start really learning the company. It's hard to learn it from the outside.
Get an emotional tie to it.
Yeah, and get an emotional tie and like start to get to know the management team or whatever. And then if your thesis proves correct, you'll size that 1% to like 5% or 10%. And like I think that he's underappreciated in terms of like how good he is at sizing the bets.
Do you think that was a learned trait? Because I've listened to all the books on him.
Yeah,
I've listened to every interview he's ever done, at least that are public multiple times probably. And I like to think about the Elon that we see today is not the same Elon that was building, Zip2 and PayPal and X initially. And then also the same person that like initially sells PayPal, takes all that cash and puts it into SpaceX.
Look, I think that's probably true in the sense that I think Elon compounds himself more than like any
Like he's just a
other.
learning machine.
He's a learning machine, and that like that's exactly where I was going. And part of it is once you have so much success, it's just usually you don't want to embarrass yourself. You don't want to look stupid. You don't want to like make mistakes. Elon is just still so unafraid to get embarrassed. And even something as simple as doing Starship testing in public, um, which like you have to bear all these New York Times articles, where they're
About like they're fucking up, and it's like,
failed
what are you
test,
talking about?
failed Starship fails to achieve its goals, like fails to reach orbit. It's like orbit wasn't even our goal. But like when you're just willing to be in the arena all day, every day, trying things, like learning, getting embarrassed. That's how you really, really learn. And to do that at the scale he does, like, of course, he's not the same person he was 20 years ago. He's at the cutting edge.
The best investments are contrarian and right.
Yeah.
What have been the biggest points where you decided to be contrarian and were wrong?
I mean, I was negative on NVIDIA like 3 years ago, which was obviously incredibly, unbelievably
Is this post
wrong.
ChatGPT launch?
Post ChatGPT launch. So I've been a giant. I literally bought NVIDIA shares in the IPO in 1999
What?
as a 13-year-old. Because I was playing video games, like I was
Yeah,
using.
you were using the graphics cards. Yeah.
So I would buy like NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel stocks, and I would do pairs trading based on, what generation of graphics cards I thought would be better or what generation of CPUs. Because at the time, like the GPUs were on an annual cycle, so were the CPUs. And it was one of these things where like to gamers, you would buy for your next build. Like if AMD was 5% better than Intel, like with CPUs, you would buy the AMD CPU. And
So you
vice
wanted like
versa.
the best machine.
Yeah, you wanted the best machine, the best
Yeah.
bang for your buck. And people were actually very, very in tune with the gamers were unbelievably in tune with the product cycle. And so I was obsessed with NVIDIA. I literally bought the stock in 1999. And I traded it a lot. And then I was holding NVIDIA until like a 600 billion market cap. I was holding
Didn't they go public for like a few hundred million?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was holding NVIDIA to like a 600 billion market cap. And at that point, one thing that's actually really like a crazy lesson, like I underestimated Jensen, to be honest. Even though I had been a shareholder of the company, like I didn't think Jensen was as good as he is. Like man, like he's really good, and he's really pushed his advantage in an incredible way, and he's been so aggressive. And I don't think it was as obvious as people might think now. Like if you go look at his earnings presentations 10 years ago or whatever, and it had been a very sleepy company for a long time. It had primarily been a game, like originally gaming company, gaming customers. And when we go, I don't remember the exact numbers, but like roughly 3 years ago, the revenue is like right when it flipped from being like half consumer to half data center. I don't remember the exact revenue.
A few tens of billions, I think, or
it
like
was.
maybe
I think it was
20.
like they did a quarter. It was like 4 billion of gaming revenue, 4 billion of of data center revenue, and it was like a $600 billion stock. And I sold. And at the time, I was just like, this thing is trading at such a crazy multiple, and it's
Have Benjamin Graham in the back of your head saying, "What the fuck are you
Benjamin
doing?"
Graham in the back of my head. And the other thing is like one, I underestimated Jensen. Two, I think that the market, like I'm going to get crushed for saying this, but I think the market was a little bit irrational at that point. And, but then Jensen played the irrationality of the market so well that then it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I'll explain this a little. Like at the time, so I think, so NVIDIA bought Mellanox in like 2019,
Was that like 8 billion, I think?
about 8 billion.
Yeah.
I think this is probably the best acquisition in history.
One of those 60 chess moves where it doesn't totally make sense at the time. And then
Probably the best acquisition in history, and gave NVIDIA like a huge interconnect moat, which is gigantic, like seismic, and just exactly right time. Hardware time scales are long, like from the time that the data center boom became obvious, like it's like 4 years before someone like AMD or Intel will catch up on the interconnect side and on the whole system side. And the data center and AI thing came so abruptly on the back of ChatGPT that they were actually already working on these things. It just wasn't, NVIDIA had made it its like sole focus and had done the Mellanox acquisition.
Jensen has got a special ability to be willing to look wrong for 100%. A very long time.
He has a lot in common with Elon.
Yeah.
And I actually did not understand that at the time. But so, yeah, he has a special gift for that. But so anyways, I knew what was on the roadmap of AMD and Intel. And I personally feel like if you go back to 2.5 years, like if you were to go another 18 months from now, that the technology they were going to put out would be like roughly at parity with where NVIDIA would be in 4 years. Back at that point when NVIDIA was a $600 billion company. But what happened is NVIDIA became so valuable, like, and Intel and AMD became so like cheap, they had to cut a lot of their investments, and NVIDIA was able to just like wildly ramp up their own investments. And so now I don't think Intel and AMD will catch up. Like, it's my personal opinion. It's not investment advice or anything, but like I think that we live in the timeline was altered because of how well NVIDIA traded and how well Jensen pushed that advantage. And I think this probably was knowable if I would have known just how good Jensen is. But I also felt like the market was underappreciating like how good the AMD and Intel projects were in their hoppers. But they've been like jeopardized because they got so suppressed by the NVIDIA tsunami. And so this is one where like I'm embarrassed because I was like very, I mean, I even had one tweet where I was like, said something like, I think NVIDIA is overrated.
Like this stuff doesn't make sense.
Yeah, this stuff doesn't make sense. So it's like, obviously I was wrong based on the financial performance. And I think I was wrong in terms of how good Jensen is. And I think I was wrong in terms of understanding like how well they would push the advantage. But I also think the irony is like, I think so much of the capital that went into NVIDIA over the last 2 years is people that have never done anything in hardware companies. They don't know anything about semiconductors. Like I bought NVIDIA in the IPO. I've been obsessed with TSMC for 20 years. I've been obsessed with ASML for 20 years. Like, and so it's just like I've been obsessed with Broadcom since I was a little kid, like literally obsessed.
And I think Broadcom, I mean, even that company hasn't really like fully realized it kind of had almost an NVIDIA Tesla-esque moment over the past 3-4 years.
Broadcom's a kind of a misunderstood company in many ways. And like, this is I'm going to embarrass myself. Like I did not grow up rich at all, but my town where I moved to when I was 9 is a very rich town though. And like in my high school, it's kind of crazy. One of the daughters of Henry Samueli was in my class.
So you're just surrounded by wealth.
Well, I was surrounded by I think my school, like in my school, there were kids who were like Mexican American immigrants whose parents were house cleaners, and like I had a friend whose parents were journalist, like of like the local paper, and he dated the daughter of a billionaire, like another Silicon billionaire. I'm not going to name them. They're amazing. All of those people are amazing people. But my school had like 6 orders of magnitude of wealth. Literally, it was insane. But so the founder of Broadcom, Henry Samueli, his daughter was in my class, like literally in my class. And I went to like a school dance party at her house, and they were the wealthiest family in the town. And so I've been obsessed with Broadcom from a young age, because whenever there's like the wealthiest family around you, it's like, how do they make so much money? What do they do? And happened to be very lucky that it was from Silicon. So I've been obsessed with Broadcom since a young age. Obviously, like Henry Nicholas III were both at UCLA. Henry Samuel was a professor at UCLA, and Henry Nicholas III was his grad student. And they started Broadcom, and the company's evolved with the products quite a few times over history. But then there was kind of the reverse merger with Avago, and Hawk is an incredible, he's an incredible capital allocator, and they bought VMware and rolled up a lot of things. And so Broadcom is this weird company where like they have like this unbelievably rich history in telecommunications hardware and then in like data center hardware, but they also have been this just like unbelievable private equity machine and bought VMware. But Broadcom today has been an incredible innovator in kind of like next generation data center components. And like they're the first people to have like a working what's called co-packaged optics product. And I am personally incredibly bullish on this thing called silicon photonics. I mentioned earlier, if I was going to do one of 2 things to, turn 10 billion into Bell Labs, like the 2 things would be starting a chemicals company or
Doing
like
Broadcom.
doing silicon photonics fab. And like Broadcom is one of the companies that inspires me the most. And so I'm weird in that like I've loved this space since I was a little kid. And then I watched these people enter this space 2 years ago, like don't know anything. And I was like, man, you have people that don't know anything, like
You live and
buying
breathe
these
it, and then
stock. They can't tell you anything. They don't know what Mellanox is. And they're like saying this thing is going to $3 trillion. And I'm like, okay, I'm out. And I made a little video at Sequoia saying like why, like I said I would, to my credit, I said I would never short the stock because like I'm very afraid of the irrationality around it. And I didn't know like the scale of what AI build outs could be. But I said like I'm a seller at 600 billion. So anyways, that was very wrong. And man, I wish I would have held, for that other 8x.